As you may know, Kanye just dropped a new album, and if I'm being completely honest, it may be competing for bottom 3 albums in his discography, right next to Donda 2 and Jesus is King. Let me explain, this opinion isn't as negative as you think it is. This album comes in what I call Kanye's post-divorce period, where he started to kind of fall off in terms of quality and Kanye himself taking a backseat to the features and production. The start of this, quote, fall off, I feel, starts at Donda. Donda is a very disjointed, bloated album with a lot of highs and about as many lows. I feel the high points are good due to a number of tracks being reworked Yanni demos, which already sound pretty promising. Even the newer Kanye sounding tracks sounded pretty good. My thoughts on Donda 2, which at this point is never getting finished, let's face it, is that it's all the worst aspects of Donda rolled into one album. Modern Kanye at this point, to me, is less interesting as a rapper but more as a curator. I won't even say producer because he has 27 other ones in the studio making mid. Essentially, I'd call him an artsy DJ Khaled. Now let's flash forward to when Vultures dropped. At this point, Kanye basically alienated himself from the industry after another round of not taking his meds. Here, Kanye just married his Kim Kardashian replica from Clonate and openly came out of the closet as a Burzum fan. But enough with context, let's actually talk about the album. I got a couple gripes with this album, and one of them is with Kanye himself. Knowing what prime Kanye was capable of, and some of the better tracks on Donda where he's able to keep up with modern features and production, I feel this was kind of a step back. Here I feel Kanye is taking a backseat even more to the production and features when compared to previous albums. I forgot to mention this before, but technically this album is a joint album between Ye and Ty Dolla $ign. Even though I don't know much about Ty Dolla $ign, he's way more interesting to listen to on this album than Kanye here, most of the time. I don't come to Kanye for mind-blowing lyrics, nor do I really pay attention for most of the time. As a producer, I'm the least qualified person to talk about someone's pen. But what I do care about is delivery and presence, and in that regard, Ye's part on Paid is contender for his most annoyingly delivered verse. I'm sorry. I'd say it's a contender for one of his worst verses. Ty is trying his hardest to keep the song listenable, but it just doesn't work. Then there's Back to Me, where Kanye says basically nothing for 2 verses, has one decent sounding flow on the chorus. Yeah, you know the one. And then Freddie Gibbs comes in and completely invalidates him. Like, I can go all day. Cardi and Travis destroy Kanye on Fuck Some, and then Cardi and Ty Dolla $ign on Carnival. Lil Durk and Ty rock his shit on the title track. It's like Kanye is just an afterthought if we're being honest. Another gripe I have is that a number of the tracks just kinda sound undercooked or barely finished. It's not as bad as Donda 2, but yeah, it's still pretty rough. Just look at the track Burn. It's literally one verse of Kanye, a good sounding verse for that matter, and one chorus. I feel it would have been a lot better if it were, say, longer. Here it feels the song was just thrown in to bolster the tracklist because sound-wise, the classic Kanye production just doesn't fit with the darker production the album takes. As for another example, with the track Talking, they sound like 2 completely different demos just stapled together and presented as a whole track. Thematically, the track would make more sense if the second part had Kanye rapping about his daughter right after his daughter spit a verse. The thing is, it's Ty doing verse 2, about his own daughter and not Kanye. Like, this could have been a cool introspective track about Kanye's influence on his kid. The transition between the 2 parts was also pretty clumsy, both lyrically and production-wise, and maybe for the latter, that was the point, but still I feel it didn't really work well. In my opinion, Good Don't Die is basically an extended chorus with boring production. I know a lot of people really like that track, but it just doesn't do much for me, you know? And the track King is just Kanye stumbling over a relatively good beat for 2.5 minutes. For a final track on a Kanye album, it's very underwhelming. But in that regard, I feel that the penultimate track, Problematic, works better as a closer since it actually sounds finished and has some feeling of finality that King just doesn't. The track is very whatever though, in my opinion. You know what, speaking of that track, let's talk about the big National Socialist elephant in the room. Do I like that anti-Semitism is in my Kanye album? Obviously not. It's not something I agree with, and he of all people doing it on such a large platform is pretty awful. Is it really affecting my enjoyment of the album? Not really. Is it weird that he's essentially bragging about being anti-Semitic, even if it's on 3 of the 16 tracks? Absolutely. But at this point, yada yada, separate art and artist, yada yada. Don't worry Kanye, I think Varg made some good ass riffs too. And Destroy Lonely too apparently. And Gucci Mane. And wait a minute, Billie Eilish like Fortnite balls, I'm gay! Of course, a highlight on any Kanye album I feel is the production, and there are more hits than misses. It's very much sticking to that new Kanye sound that was on Donda and its sequel, with a few detours that mostly don't end up falling on their faces. In fact, I say this album sounds like a hypothetical Donda 3. but it sounds more so in the vein of Donda 1 than 2. This isn't really a bad thing, but I always kinda expect Kanye to bring an overall new sound in each of his albums. There was a noticeable leap in sound between albums like Jesus is King to Donda or Yeezus to The Life of Pablo. Given that we're almost 2 years removed from Donda 2 and more than 2 with the original, I expected more of a leap in sound, which this album just didn't do. I do like the new Kanye sound, but nothing really different was done here. Anyways, the first 2 tracks sound great and flow pretty well into each other, and Keys to My Life has a pretty cool and subtle Wu-Tang reference partway through the track. Speaking of samples, Carnivals makes reference to A Hell of a Life, which was on Dark Fantasy. However, instead of making the track better, it kinda made me wish I were listening to Dark Fantasy instead of Vultures. Anyways, some of the production highlights for me were Hood Rat, Paperwork, and the aforementioned Burn, as well as the title track Vultures and Fuck Some. There are a few lows in the production overall, but as I said, Paid is not a good song, even production-wise, and Good Don't Die has a very boring beat. Do It sounds very thrown together, especially with the cheap MIDI-sounding orchestral strings. Maybe it's intentional since I feel the production is trying to invoke a specific vibe, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Either way, for me, it's kind of a low point. One last thing to say that I find a bit interesting is that Timbaland, JPEG Mafia, and Mike Dean are actually behind the boards on this album. If you told me Timbo did the tracks he did, I wouldn't have believed you because they don't sound anything like Timbaland beats, at least to my knowledge. As for Peggy, I could hear his influence kinda in Fuck Some, but for Stars, Beg Forgiveness, and King, I can't hear it. I expected him to bring some weirdness to the album, but unfortunately he ended up becoming the 28th producer tweaking hats and making mid instead of being the scientist he claimed to be. Then again, he joined Layton Production, so I can't blame him since that's pretty much the only thing he could have been doing. The sole Mike Dean appearance is the most confusing one since I was under the impression that he wasn't working with Kanye anymore. But yeah, production good overall. So after giving it a good 3 listens, which is more than I'd expect anyone to do, I just think it's slightly below average. A strong 4 or maybe a light 5, as the Melon would say. You know, cause I trust him for reasonable music takes. I don't think Kanye has ever dropped a truly bad album. Yet. To me, 5 means the album is average, and what I'd call truly mid. Now I've seen a lot of people giving this album a 7 or an 8 out of 10 online, and honestly, I can't tell the vision. Is this better than Watch the Throne? No. Is this better than The Life of Pablo? No. Is this even touching Dark Fantasy? No. I think even Utopia and 2093 are way better than this. There's no sugarcoating it. Donda. Vultures is an okay album. Overall, I think this is a step above Donda 2 and Jesus is King, but that's not exactly a high bar to clear. To me, I put this on par with my enjoyment of Self-Titled, but just barely. It's definitely not winning any Album of the Year awards, but definitely doesn't deserve any worse album placements. With that being said, this is what my tier list looks like now. Okay, bye.